Look, I'm the publisher of the Australian Defence Magazine. It's Australia's largest defence trade media organisation. So we're independently owned by the Yaffa family, who own Yaffa Media. So we're one of Yaffa Media's many titles. Yaffa Media is a 100-year-old company based in Surrey Hills, and they own us. So we report independently on Australia's defence capabilities and acquisitions. So we look at what the federal government is buying or sustaining from a military platform point of view, and we report as well on industry, what industry developments are happening here and in Australia's near abroad. So, to me, that is New Zealand, which sort of folds into the main coverage of Australia, as well as Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, places like that. So that's the Australian Defence Magazine. Me personally, I've been at ADM for 7 years, 3 or 4 as publisher. So I lead the business. I've got profit and loss responsibility. Before that, I was a journalist with ADM. And before that, I was at university. So that's my background. I did a bit of service when I was at uni in the Army Reserve. Professional life has been in journalism. So trade journalism is a little bit different to mainstream media. So we focus on sort of what's important for a business from a business point of view. And the main readership of ADM is the Department of Defence itself. So about 80% of our readers are inside the Department of Defence or Department of Finance, Department of Treasury, and Prime Minister and Cabinet.
I see. Okay, thanks very much. And can I ask, just in terms of the AUKUS agreement and the nuclear submarine deal, what do you think the benefits of that are for Australia's defence?
Look, it's pretty multifaceted, and I think you can zoom in and look at tactical benefits, and you can zoom out and look at strategic benefits. So I'll start with the strategic benefits. I think the argument for AUKUS, and I'll preface this, I think, by saying, none of these are necessarily the views of ADM. They're all my personal opinions. From a strategic point of view, the argument for AUKUS is that it reinforces our treaty alliance with the United States, the ANZUS Treaty. So in the same way that the UK and the US have long shared nuclear submarine secrets and capabilities to reinforce that alliance, AUKUS ties us in to the US alliance much more and increases US sort of, not dependence on us per se, but definitely the depth of the relationship. So the US is our main security partner and has been since the Second World War. So it's essentially a strong way of doubling down on an alliance with the world's most powerful country. So that's from a strategic point of view. If you look at it in a little bit more granular detail, acquiring nuclear-powered submarines provides Australia with a naval capability that is the preserve of very few nations, and really is what naval strategists will tell you is the apex predator of the ocean. There's no capability from a military point of view out there like nuclear-powered submarines, because the oceans really are the last place on Earth that you can hide something that big. When a nuclear submarine dives and stays underwater for a month or two, very, very difficult to find out where that is, which is why the US and the UK and other countries use them as a core part of their nuclear deterrent. So most nuclear deterrents will rely on 2 or 3 different delivery mechanisms, silos on land, or aircraft delivery, or nuclear submarine capability. The nuclear submarines are the most, in terms of deterrence, probably the strongest contributor, because no country knows where any other country's nuclear submarines are at any one time. And the US has often used that to demonstrate force. So when the US wants to make a point against Russia or whatever it might be, they'll surface a submarine outside a Russian shipyard to make the point that they're sitting there on the seafloor. So from a strategic point of view, I suppose there's the US alliance, and there's also Australia joining a club of 7 countries, I think, that have nuclear-powered submarines. We're also, due to our geography, the endurance of nuclear-powered submarines is very appealing to the Royal Australian Navy. Our two main submarine bases are Fleet Base East in Sydney and Fleet Base West on Garden Island off of Perth. The distance between those two places is huge. So a nuclear submarine can travel faster underwater and can travel without surfacing, which for the Royal Australian Navy's, with the distance between those two bases and with the distance from those bases to the main area of operations in Eastern Asia, speed and diving ability is pretty crucial. So that's kind of at a top level. At a tactical level, nuclear submarines have some advantages over conventional diesel-electric submarines that are appealing. So the main one is that they don't have to surface. So diesel-electric submarines, every so often they have to come to the surface to breathe air for recharge their batteries. When a submarine surfaces, that's when it's most easy to spot. So you can use satellites or all kinds of things to detect a surfaced submarine. Nuclear submarines don't have to surface, so they can stay underwater for as long as the crew can handle it mentally, and as long as they've got supplies. So the limiting factor becomes not, recharging the engines; it becomes how much food they can take on board with the crew. So from a detectability point of view, they have some advantages there. They offer the Australian government a range of new options that conventional submarines don't. So one of those main ones is land strike. So a nuclear-powered submarine can fire a Tomahawk missile from beneath the sea against targets deep into land masses. So you'd seen, for example, in the recent strikes, the American strikes on Iran, a lot of the coverage was on the B-2 bomber delivery of the GBUs that hit the nuclear plants in Iran. But Tomahawks were also fired from US nuclear submarines sitting in the Indian Ocean, so against targets deep into Iran. So it provides the Australian government with the ability to hit targets deep into Asia, essentially, through land strike capability. It provides others as well, one of the main ones being special forces insertion. So you can discreetly insert special forces through hatches on nuclear-powered submarines. The discreteness is increased by the fact that the submarine hasn't had to surface en route to wherever it might be dropping the special forces off. And special forces tend to be one of Australia's most relied upon contributions to coalition operations. So if you look at Iraq or Afghanistan or any of those recent conflicts that Australia's been involved with, special forces are leaned on heavily by the Australian government to contribute to coalition operations without exposing, I think, the wider ADF to the costs of prolonged engagement, warfighting. So that's sort of what the benefits are from a small level to a strategic point of view. AUKUS has a lot of costs as well, and I think that's where the conversation starts to get nuanced.
I see. Can I ask, just in regard to that cost, the sort of $368 billion number that's kind of been put out there, do you think that could be spent more effectively if that was to be assigned to, let's say it's set aside for defense? Would there be a more effective kind of way to use that money than the 8 submarines?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like my personal views, the other countries that have nuclear-powered submarines are Russia, France, the UK, China, India, the United States, and soon to be Brazil as well. All of those countries have economies that are at least twice the size of Australia's, except for Russia, which is about the same size as us, but Russia spends 40% of its federal budget on defense, which we don't want to be doing. So we are trying to operate a great power capability whilst being a middle power economy and a middle power country. Those countries also have populations that are at least 3 times the size of ours as well. So from an affordability point of view and from a demographic point of view, we have far more work to do, or have to stretch our resources far further, more than twice as far, 3 times as far as any of those other countries. So $368 billion is a lot of money. And that will probably represent, naval spending as a whole will represent 40+% of our entire defense budget. It's going to be larger. The naval budget will be larger than Army and Air Force's capital acquisition budgets put together. The submarines will essentially become a fourth service arm. So you'll have, in terms of funding, Navy, Army, Air Force, and the submarines by themselves. And then when you take those submarines and you put them in a regional context, the US and China have something like 60 plus submarines. So when you take R8 and you add that, you put that on the chessboard in the Indo-Pacific, it doesn't tip the scales. But it is a huge outlay from the point of view of an Australian taxpayer, a massive, massive outlay. When you get your tax return and it divides down, what the Australian government spent on every portfolio, and welfare is itemised. You'll see aged care, jobs and welfare, family care, all that stuff. If you were to itemise the defence line item, AUKUS would be a huge chunk. It's hundreds of dollars for it. An average Australian salary, every single taxpayer in Australia will be spending hundreds of dollars a year on these submarines. So there are many other capabilities that are being lost, I think, in order to fund these submarines. So yes, we can do it. I don't doubt that. Well, actually, I do doubt that we can do it. But it's beyond any doubt that it will come with significant opportunity cost. And I think if the Australian government doesn't want to raise the defence budget, which is their prerogative, then the rest of the Defence Force will be hollowed out. If they do raise the defence budget, that will come at the expense of either increased borrowing or other portfolios like health and education. And again, as a taxpayer, I think you've got to be asking whether that's how you want your money to be spent.
I see. And what would you say to those sort of claiming that AUKUS is about backing American dominance in the Pacific and not so much about protecting Australia? And some people saying that it does take sovereignty from Australia.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's no easy answer to that, because that's something that historians will probably form conclusions on when, if and when there's a conflict over Taiwan and America uses AUKUS as leverage or doesn't use AUKUS as leverage. Yeah, look, undoubtedly it contributes to American dominance in the Indo-Pacific. These are American submarines. But there's going to be questions about whether we get them. We can get into that in a little bit. So yeah, look, it certainly reinforces America's position, not just through the submarines themselves, but also through the US basing of their own submarines in Australia. So one of Australia's strengths geographically is that we're far enough from Asia to be out of range of, a lot of missiles, but we're close enough to be relevant operationally. So in the Second World War, Australia was used as a sort of an operating base by the Americans. They based a lot of kit here in troops and used that to support their actions against the Japanese throughout the Pacific. And the same strategic sort of impetus still exists today. So servicing US Virginia-class submarines out of WA will be a big contributor to America's force posture in the Western Pacific. As for sovereignty, look, I personally think that it certainly will erode our sovereignty. I think we're seeing a lot of signals coming out of Washington at the moment suggesting that the delivery of the submarines will be contingent on Australia providing the US with some sort of guarantee or some sort of idea as to how we will use those submarines in the event of a conflict that America chooses to enter into. So, the Australian government, to their credit, have pushed back on that. And you've seen Albanese and Pat Conroy, the Defence Industry Minister, say that the use of Australian force is a sovereign prerogative of the Australian government and of the Australian government of the day, acknowledging that the Labor Party may not be in power. And the Labor Party of today is certainly not going to make decisions on behalf of governments of the future. But the US has leverage, undeniably has leverage. And if they were to say, well, we're not going to give you these submarines unless you either spend more money on them or commit to using them in a war of our choosing, and we say no, then they could just not deliver them, and then we won't have any submarines, and that's a problem.
And what would you say that this impact could have on relations with neighbouring countries and China in particular?
Yeah, that's a good question. there was a lot of concern when AUKUS was first announced regionally because of, it sort of goes a little bit against the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in spirit, if not in the letter of the treaty. And I'm not really across the details, so I can't talk with authority on it. But there was concern. I think China will see Australia's operational nuclear power submarines in the same way that it sees, American ones. It's certainly a deterrent if we get them and if they're operational. But it will see it in the wider context of US force posture in the Western Pacific. And as I said before, if you're looking at chess pieces on a chessboard, Australia is one, pawn really on the table. So it's not, it's not a huge player.
Okay, and can I just ask as well, what does peace mean to you personally, and what do you think the best way to go about achieving that is in relation to defence?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question, actually. No one's ever asked me that. Peace is the absence of conflict. Peace is the absence of war. So I would say in the Indo-Pacific specifically, in Australia's relationship with China specifically, right now is peace. Obviously there is tension and there is a lot of grey zone conflict, but there is no hot war right now in the Indo-Pacific. Australia is not on a war footing right now, and that's what peace looks like. And I think continuing to make sure that the country exists in that state and we don't have to mobilize the population and we're not, sending people overseas to fight and die. That's what peace is. As to how peace is maintained, there's a lot of different theories and, everybody's going to have a little bit of a different perspective. I think peace has to be maintained holistically. And one of the risks of, I think, overfunding the defense force is that, if all you have is a hammer, then every problem is a nail. And hammers aren't always the best solution, and not every problem is a nail. I think engagement with the Pacific Islands is crucial. Diplomatic engagement with China is crucial. And, like the foreign aid budget, all those things are crucial, I think, to maintaining Australia's relationships overseas, foreign relations. And the Defence Force is one of those tools. It's not the only one. So, yeah, I don't doubt that a Defence Force is necessary to some degree, to a large degree. I don't doubt that a well-funded Defence Force and a capable Defence Force is important, carrots and sticks. You can make the argument that AUKUS and hollowing out the rest of the Defence Force, the benefits to deterrence theory may equalize or be reduced. Deterrence is a real thing, but it's not the only solution. I think it's a matter of being able to back up your words, but also making sure that the words you say and what you do out there in the world, or what Australia does, is engaging, is meaningful, is important to other countries. And I think I think the Australian government in the Labor's term has done quite a good job so far of getting out into the Pacific Islands, particularly putting Australia's interests forward. I think recognising the state of Palestine. I think all those things are great ways of putting Australia's values out there and engaging with the world beyond the use of the Defence Force or beyond the use of force. So yeah, look, my point is essentially it has a role. The Defence Force has a role, but it's one tool of many.
Excellent. Thank you. And just my last question, just because Australia has already kind of backed out of 2 submarine deals in the past, do you think it is too late for us to back out of AUKUS potentially, or the submarine deal?
No, it's never too late. There's a strong possibility that the US will pull out, I think. The US production rate of submarines is just not enough to meet the requirements of both the US Navy and Australia. So the submarine production rate right now is like 1.2 or 1.3 Virginia class per year. That number needs to be 2.3, in order for the president to certify that delivering us submarines does not degrade the capability of the US Navy. Now that increase from 1.3 to 2.3 is monumental, and I can't see a way that it will get there in time. So I think a likely outcome is that the Virginia class delivery to Australia will be delayed, if not cancelled outright. The US and the UK will deploy their own nuclear powered submarines to Perth, but just we won't have any. And then the impacts of that on the acquisition of our own nuclear powered submarine, which has been built by the United Kingdom, yet to be seen. I don't have a lot of faith that will be delivered on time. And then the Collins submarines that we have at the moment are getting pretty old. So it's not too late to pull out. I think events may force a decision on us anyway. And whether or not that is a good or bad thing in the long run has yet to be seen. But as I said at the beginning, each Australian is paying a lot of money to these submarines. And I think, there's positives and there's negatives, but it's, I think, important for everyone to be informed.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much, Ewan. I really appreciate that.
All good, Cooper. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Cool.